John Talks, episode 16, my journey with marijuana and how it helped me with my PTSD. So, I've been smoking marijuana, let's see, this is 2025. I've been smoking marijuana nearly every day on orders from my doctor, Dr. Dre, since 2005. So, yeah, I suppose this is the 20th anniversary of me and Mary Jane. And so every stoner has their story. And my story is a little bit different because most stoners, they're like, oh, I was like 7 years old or whatever, like 10 years old when I first smoked, or I was, whatever. Certainly no later than high school. And in my case, I didn't smoke marijuana for the first time until I was in my Army career, until after I graduated flight school, which was like well over a year after I graduated from West Point. I never tried marijuana in high school or college. Obviously, college would have been difficult, but didn't try it in high school. I didn't even drink in high school. So I was, unlikely candidate to be a stoner, I think. I don't know. I wasn't really thinking about it at the time. When I've thought back about it, I do think that if I had smoked marijuana in high school, that I probably would not have gone to a service academy. I definitely think if I had done mushrooms or acid, I definitely would not have. I had extremely low percentage of me doing that because I was always really creative and had a huge imagination, but I hadn't really had a chance to actualize it. Because I was living, that was after my parents got divorced, and I was living with my mom and stepdad in San Jose, and they had a very toxic, abusive environment. And so a lot of my upbringing was, trying to leave there, was just like focused on like not opening up in that environment and just moving along with my life. So, if I had opened up in that environment, probably would have just immediately tapped into my creativity and then probably made a beeline for the arts, like right off the bat, would be my guess. However, that is not what the fates had in store for me. So I waited till after flight school, and there was a bunch of stories leading up to it, but I can't really share them because they involve some other people, and I'm not, they're a little bit sordid, so I don't want to put them on blast. But let's just say after I graduated flight school, I smoked for the first time. And just to dispel a myth, it was not the gateway drug, because I actually did do mushrooms while I was a cadet on training before my senior year. Yeah, before my senior year in the summer down at Fort Eustis, Virginia, courtesy of another cadet. And I didn't even know I was going to be doing them that night. So that was interesting. That's a really good story. I'll tell that story another time, but kind of dispels that myth that marijuana was the gateway drug. It was actually the opposite for me. I actually tried, something much harder before I tried marijuana. Anyway, so in flight school, I smoke it. It's kind of whatever. And then a couple times when I was stationed in Germany, I smoked some bud and smoked some hash, and I was familiar with it. And, really where my marijuana story begins is when I decided that I was going to leave the Army and move back home to LA, live with my dad and my brother, make a run in comedy. So my brother is already living at the house in LA up in Saugus, Santa Clarita. And he is what I would describe at that time. He's in his early 20s. Was a classic SoCal stoner, like gamer, gym rat, baller, cool dude. Had like a tricked out Acura Integra. Was enjoying himself and loved hip hop and like electronic music. And I think at the time it was like Eminem, still Eminem world. And yeah, he was a stoner. He was the kind of stoner who would, drive his car somewhere and hotbox it up and listen to music and, do it right. And so he was also in on the ground floor of cannabis clubs when they were out here. So I had to make a decision right before I left the Army. Excuse me. About what would, a lot of things. And when I decided to move home and go into comedy, one of the things I decided was that I was going to smoke marijuana because I had a feeling that it was going to help me decompress from the military. And it was also part of kind of like an escape. I had like escape fantasies. I was stuck in the military and I was having escape fantasies, one of which was that I was going to move to Costa Rica and live on the beach with a helper monkey and surf and hang out with my monkey and just leave the world behind. And, I did end up going on a couple surf trips to Costa Rica, and it was a good fantasy. It was a good escape fantasy. It might have worked. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to smoke marijuana, and I think it'll help me decompress from all this stuff. Cause I didn't really understand how deep I got into the military and like how high level and stuff. Cause I didn't really talk to anybody about it. I just kind of kept it to myself and then just left. And so when I made that decision, part of it was that, okay, my brother's a stoner and he's into it. And I remember it was like the last time before I left the Army, I think it was, I came down for a visit. I think maybe it was like a ski trip or something. And I was in the house and I smoked like a huge fat bowl, like 2 of them with my bro. And I just immediately got nauseous. And what was happening was I got really high, and it was the first time I got really high. And I could like, all of the stress in my body started to come into my mouth through my gums. And I could literally feel like the stress dripping off of my gums and my teeth, like into my mouth. And I was trying to get rid of it. And then all of the stress starts pouring out of me, and it made me incredibly nauseous. So I had to go to the bathroom. I was just throwing up I even lost track. My brother was coming in and checking on me, and he was like all concerned because he knew that, here I was having sort of my entry into using marijuana to help myself. And here I was like throwing up. So he was a bit concerned that, I was going to get the wrong idea, because that's not what happens to most people when they smoke weed. But, I was either, I think it was at the tail end of my career when I did it. But I was just like so deep in stress that my body was just purging. And so while I was throwing up, I was super high. And I told him, I was like, look, dude, I know I'm throwing up and I know how I look, but I feel great. And I was telling him, I was like, all this stress is coming out of me. And I look like a wreck, but I really did feel great. And I could feel the stress coming out of me. It's just, I never had such a stress relief in my life. It was incredible. And it was just purging and vomiting. And it went on like that for like a few hours. And then it happened one more time, like less severely. And then that was it. That was the end of the purging. But interestingly, the purge was what let me know that it was working, because I could feel the stress coming out of me. And so I was like, okay, this is the right choice. Because at the time when I left the Army, I was in such like a self-medication cycle of denial because of all the stuff I'd done and all the stress I'd been through. And yeah, all the, the alien abductions were still going on. So that stress was on top of all. So it's just like a lot of unique, heavy stresses were occurring. They were causing this incredible stress on me. That's before I even like get to the PTSD, which is like a base layer of stress. So all the stuff was coming out of me, and I was like, oh, good. This is the first time I felt relief in forever. But the routine that I'd had like the last year before I left the military was so bad. I was, so like to start in the morning, I'm not even going to include all the food I was eating, because it was all processed food, like probably like 4,000 calories or more worth of processed food in a day. It was terrible. But just the drugs, I was waking up in the morning, going to work at Fort Knox, and during the course of the day, I would drink like, no doubt, like 10 to 12 sodas. Crazy amount of soda. I was chain smoking like 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes a day while I was doing this job. Then when I get home, I would nearly immediately engage in like fairly heavy drinking, like every day. So like weekday, weeknight didn't really matter, or weekday, weekend didn't really matter. And I was drinking. I mean, I would start like probably like 3 to 6 beers, and then switch over to like 2 or 3 like stiff, like maybe like double Red Bull and vodkas, and sometimes more depending. If it was a weekend, really drink because that's the culture in the Army. While chain smoking, and then at the end, wash it all down with 2 Tylenol PMs, right? And then get up in the morning and do the whole thing again. I was doing that for like a year straight at least. And one of my hopes was that if I started smoking marijuana, that it would remove the need for any of the other stuff, like especially like alcohol, cut down the alcohol, and like do a bunch of other things. And so that factored into my decision to start smoking. So I moved home in 05, and I start smoking on a regular basis, and it works basically. It takes a lot longer than expected, but it starts making it so that my healing process could begin. And at that time, I was doing stand-up comedy. I was getting famous on MySpace and YouTube as Johnny Ska of the Ska Brothers, and there was no let up. I mean, I was running like 16 to 18-hour days during those days. It was crazy. It was nonstop because the success was hitting, and so I had to keep working, which in the long run, like looking back on it, it was not good because I really needed to spend 3 to 6 months going to therapy and rehabbing myself from the Army, but I didn't know any better. And I ran just like right into arts and entertainment and hit success quick, which was maybe it turns out it was the wrong thing for my personal health. But when it hits, you got to go with it. So the marijuana was working in a lot of respects. And over time, and it took a while, the alcohol consumption dropped. Like it took a while, but I stopped abusing alcohol. Eventually, I cut out sodas completely. And a lot of what I was hoping would happen happened. And then once I got a little bit of momentum of healing and having my consciousness be aware of it and have my consciousness expanding, going, oh, it's not just healing, but when the healing happens, I get growth. And that's when I could identify the healthy correlation between what I was doing with the marijuana and what my body was doing. And so I started writing that. And then it was a long process. It took years. But the arts, all of the arts combined with that, like the marijuana helped me relax enough to be able to open up emotionally and find out like which parts of me were damaged, which parts of me were irreparably damaged, which parts of me could be healed, all that sort of stuff. And it made me feel safe to open up. And then engaging in all these other artistic disciplines, like early on, I started playing drums. I mean, obviously I was doing stand-up comedy, so that was allowing me to basically do group therapy and get a bunch of stuff off of my mind that I had to deal with in the military and things I'd seen, all that type of stuff. And then I got into music, and I definitely wouldn't have gotten into music without marijuana. If marijuana was a gateway drug for me for anything, it was a gateway drug to start playing music. And I needed it because I started playing drums. And now further background on me, like I took piano lessons as a kid. So I felt competent on a keyboard, but I needed the drums because in the military, I'd been around so much uncontrollable large machinery. I'd been a helicopter pilot, that being at the helm of creating a bunch of noise and creating rhythm and art out of a bunch of noise and metal did something for me, something therapeutic, and it helped me get a bunch of stuff out of my field and my subconscious that I didn't even know was there. But when I sat down at a drum kit, I just started playing the crap out of it, and I was getting a lot off of me. And I ended up being in 2 garage bands with my brother, and we even played a show with one of them. It was a pretty successful little show we did. We had a band called 800 Feet Tall. We wrote an entire album worth of songs, original songs, because my brother's a great songwriter. And yeah, we played a show at a bookstore at the Barnes and Noble. I think it was Barnes and Noble back when it was in Valencia. It was good. Had a crowd and everything. And I even closed it out by singing a song. It was fun. And then we ended up having another garage band, the King's Crapper, which was a punk band. We did record an album. We recorded a garage album out of it, not like a official one. And that one was really good. And I played drums on that. That was fun. And that would not, it definitely, none of that would have happened without marijuana. And I mean, I went on to create, I've created and published 2 full electronic albums and like a few EPs, a couple EPs, and a couple like long DJ sets that are on Spotify and Apple Music. And those definitely would not have happened if I hadn't been smoking bud. So thanks, bud. But aside from the artistic fruits, the important part was that it was the first time that I felt like I had a way to take control of my PTSD, both from the military and early childhood and from dealing with the Greys. So that's a lot of trauma. It's like the 7-layer burrito of trauma. So that was the first time where I like really felt like I was in the driver's seat for the first time of, okay, this marijuana is an external crutch. I get it, but it's medicine. And if I use it medicinally, because I was still meditating and being, reflective and all that stuff, it wasn't just get high. It was part of a healthy regimen, or like a progressively healthier regimen, which over the years led me from that crazy spot I was in at the end of the Army where I was doing all those drugs and processed food to get through a day to, eventually I find myself on the other side, being vegan for 3 years and, not smoking cigarettes and eventually mainly getting rid of alcohol, even though I would have some destructive nights still on alcohol in my future, which, alcohol, that's the nature of alcohol. Like I can say, so 20 years of smoking weed and I've never had a destructive experience on marijuana. There's never been one time where I smoked a lot and then did a bunch of destructive stuff or any destructive stuff. In fact, it's almost universally that if I get high, I do something creative. And alcohol has always been nearly the opposite, where almost every time if I drink too much alcohol, something destructive happens, like almost invariably. And it doesn't have to be massively destructive. It could just be like, poor attitude, like self-destructive, but oftentimes, actually destructive, like fights, self-sabotage, all kinds of stuff. One of the worst nights of my life was triggered by drinking a whole bunch of Wild Turkey 101 and having a psychotic nervous breakdown. And that's never happened on marijuana. Like almost inevitably it becomes creative or at least peaceful. And you got to understand the nature of my PTSD from the military also led me to having, suicidal ideations, because it's, you're on the edge, you're in the deep end of life, doing the jobs I did in the military. And I kind of taken it just like easy come, easy go. And I hadn't really processed it all and given it the proper weight. And then when I started getting these periods of time and, thanks to the marijuana, it was giving me separation to be able to have a space to really calm my emotions down, because in a sober meditation or whatever at that time, my emotions and my feelings had basically been so damaged repeatedly through all the years that I needed something to calm them down so that I could just relax and like start feeling them, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what it did for me. And then, yeah, I mean, it led to a point where at one point, I was vegan for a few years and cleaned up my whole body, and I went Buddhist and like found peace and contentment, found ease in the pose, doing yoga. And then that made it so that eventually I was able to I was finally open to and accepting the invitation of Michael Salonius and his Sparta cohort, which he designed this program. It's a week-long PTSD camp for military, law enforcement, first responders who had PTSD and suicidal ideations because of it. So he designed this week-long thing that mimics a military exercise, except it's all group therapy and the explanation of like hero myths and like how it aids in self-healing, and then like confidence obstacle courses and equine therapy and a whole bunch of other stuff. And the dude's a genius. He's a healing genius, and the program was extraordinary. And I was there with people who had gone through just awful stuff and seen stuff that was, equal to or worse than the stuff I had been dealing with. And it was a transformational week. And basically, at the end of it, I realized that I had essentially had a kill myself button installed in my subconscious by the military due to the levels that I got to, because I was working at a top secret level. And when you get to those levels, and I can't say that nobody sat me down and like brainwashed me into it, but it's somewhere in the air, and they put it into you that it's, oh, now you're doing stuff that, if you walk out of here, if you try to leave this behind, and you talk about it, we're going to get you, or that, you're going to kill yourself. Like you'll be compelled by the weight of the situation, that it's just you against the world, and it's going to collapse you, and then like you'll disappear yourself. And it felt intentional. Cause I didn't go into the military with that thought process anywhere in me. And then when I emerged and I left essentially as a conscientious objector because of the things I'd seen, cause I was working on the planning of war. And what I saw was all, to me, it was corrupt. It wasn't, to me, pretty much everything was in violation of like Geneva Convention and like all of our treaties. And like, it was just like completely illegal. In my opinion, it was a crime against humanity. And I told people that when we were doing it. So in that sense, they don't want that guy around when that's their operation. So it created this, just a whole lot of issues in my subconscious and in my conscious that turned into the solution was like, oh, this is just like too daunting or whatever. And so like, there's always this thing in my head up until this camp, just sitting in there being like, yeah, just kill yourself. Yeah, dude, just kill yourself. Like, this is ridiculous. And like, this is, it's hopeless. It's pointless. And, there's all this stuff. And so at the end of that week, talking to other people who'd been through stuff and arrived at like similarly dire assessments and had these things lodged in their subconscious constantly, it was like, I don't want to say magically, but like mystically, it was mystically removed from my mind. No different than if somebody went in and got a brain tumor removed by a surgeon. Basically, my mind, instead of a brain, your brain is your physical organ, and your mind is sort of the astral version, the consciousness version of your biological brain. So in my mind, there was this tumor that was making me want to kill myself. And at the end of the week of that camp, that tumor had been removed. And I'm still, very grateful to Michael and Rich and Tawny and all the people at Sparta. That place, hooked it up. They hooked it up big time. And so after that, that was like 2019, and then after that, I was able to get a regular domestic therapist and work out the other issues, which I did, which was great. In fact, that was funny because there was like a month or two where she was telling me that she's like, John, she's like, yeah, therapy's over. Like, you've graduated. And I was like, are you sure? And I was like trying to talk myself into staying in therapy because I got so used to it. It was nice just to have a therapist around where you could just basically unload all your problems on them and, to just process it. It's awesome. It's like having a life caddy. So I didn't want to give that up. And she's like, no, no, no. Like, you're ready. I was like, fine. And so I got through that. And then, yeah. And then, it took a long time to heal from all that stuff. And I was juggling that with also doing a bunch of public facing performances and art and life. And I was doing my professional best to make sure that my personal issues weren't bleeding into that, which, every performer deals with that, except, mine were pretty extreme. And so I was super relieved that healing came in the forms that they did. And honestly, marijuana was the catalyst. Marijuana was the proper medicine. Like, me and my brother, we used to be in the club era from like '05 to whenever it was, like 10 or 11 that they legalized it. Forget when it was. But yeah, we used to have the card and just roll to the club and like get the weed. I kind of slightly prefer that era, but we have to go get I'd have to go to a doctor and explain what was going on. They write me a prescription. And, to this day, I still take it in the same spirit. Like and I don't, here's the thing too, is like now I don't have to have marijuana all the time. Like, it doesn't have to be an everyday thing because I'm healthy. But when I do, I still take it as though it's medicine because I still respect it for what it is. And it did. It gave me all the things that I needed to then go get the other help that I needed. And it kept my mind open because when I began the journey, maybe my mind wasn't open enough to go get the types of holistic healings that I needed. And, marijuana opened my mind and calmed down my nerves. So it basically kind of made me like a little, every time I took it, it made me like a little bit better, healthier version of myself emotionally and mentally, and relaxed my physiology enough so that for those moments I could be a better, healthier person. And then I would feel comfortable seeking the help that I needed. Whereas without the marijuana, the trauma that I was carrying in my field was so painful that if I tried to open up emotionally, which is the point you have to get to make the decision to go get help, that my energy and my feelings felt so bad and terrible that it would make me want to immediately self-medicate. And at that time, it was, mainly like, oh, let's go have some alcohol. And guess what? Alcohol has a 100% success rate of like making you not feel your bad feelings. Like, you can numb yourself out pretty quick. I mean, obviously, there's a point of diminishing returns with it, which is pretty quick, but it does get rid of that initial like, man, I don't want to feel my own feelings feeling. And so marijuana substituted for that. And then it didn't mask my feelings. It just made me feel better. And then I could calmly get into self-therapy, like start breaking it down myself. And then, because it's like anybody else, like the person themselves has to realize that they have the issue to go really get the help. Otherwise, you're gonna have to wait for an intervention, and those almost never go great. So the marijuana helped me come to the self-realizations that I truly needed the help. I had to do self-examination and let my defenses down before I could go get the help I needed. And absolutely instrumental in achieving that. And then it just had nothing but positive side effects. Like I did compare it to if I thought about it. I was like, well, if I go to a shrink, they'll probably put me on like 2 or 3 pills or whatever. And at the time I wasn't like anti-pharma at the time. I mean, I was highly skeptical of them, but I was like, well, if like people take that and works, I considered it like a possible option, weighing it against marijuana. But then when I studied it, I was like, the side effects of the government pills or the pharmaceutical pills are pretty bad. Like to include some of them, like depression and suicide were some of the side effects of like supposedly like antidepressant pills. And I was like, dude, I'm already dealing with like a lot of dark thoughts, like thinking about killing myself. I'm like, I don't think I need a pill where one of the side effects is like, hey, maybe like six days out of the week this one works, and then on the seventh you really want to kill yourself. And I'm like, dude, I don't think that matches up well with what the hole in my game is here. I think, and then I look at marijuana and the side effects are like you get the munchies or you're silly or you might want to finger paint or play guitar. And I was like, well, if I really got to compare the two, I mean, because you go pros and cons, and like the cons on the marijuana side they didn't really look like cons to me, and the cons on the pharmaceutical side look like death traps to me. And I was like, and I had just come out of death trap world, so I was very sensitive to that. And I was like, yeah, I think I gotta go with the hippies on this one. And so I analyzed it from a ton of different angles, but then yeah, and also it was on orders from my doctor, Dr. Dre, who told me to smoke weed every day. Well, technically it was the other featured rapper whose name I'm forgetting, which is not cool with me. But anyway, yeah, that's how it went down. So yeah, so I'm an advocate. I've always been an advocate for marijuana, cannabis use, and I think it's great. And I'm thankful, to God and Mother Nature and the whole universe for making it because it's awesome. And it did help me out, and it kept me out of. It actually did keep me out of problems. Maybe it doesn't keep you out of trouble like when you're in high school or junior high. Maybe it puts you into trouble back, at that level. But as an adult, having gone to the deep end of the pool already and coming out, it did keep me out of trouble. Because it also in LA, it made it so that I didn't have to do any harder drugs. Like there's a lot of people in LA who get into circles where they do very hard drugs, and marijuana actually kept me out of them because I was just happy with like if I needed to do some drugs, I was just like, oh, I'll just smoke some weed and I'll be fine. Like maybe so I didn't even really have to like drink to go out or whatever, and yeah, it worked out nice. So anyway, that's my trip with marijuana and how it helped me with my PTSD. If you have PTSD and this helps you get into a healthier path, just know that it worked for me. And also make sure that if you do have problems, like you seek help, go to proper therapists and listen to people who love you and take their perspective in and incorporate it. Because they're probably telling you the truth and they're probably giving you good advice. So on that note, thanks for listening, and I hope you have a good one.